And to me, that's what fathers do, is they say, it's time for the kids to figure it out. And that's a sense of masculinity. You can solve your own issue. And sometimes people wonder, why are kids so entitled? And the reason why, in my opinion, is because they're raised with a feminist mystique about it. Everything is given and supported. They're never really figure it out for yourself kind of kids.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Salty Pastor Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping you learn and grow in your faith. It is a journey that you must go on. It is not an optional side quest. It is something that you are either doing or not doing. You're either growing or shrinking, and we want to encourage you in your growth. We want to come alongside you in your growth. We do constantly say that ultimately your faith is your own, but that does not mean you can't have outside encouragement and advice.
Don't go
in
it
that
alone.
Journey. Yeah, don't go it alone. That's what this whole series is about. So we are talking about that, and that's what we want the Salty Pastor to be all about. We don't want you to be shallow in your faith. We want you to be deep in your faith.
Deep in your faith.
And and that's part of the Salty Pastor goal. My name is Jesse Maher. I'll be your host. And we cannot do this without the Salty Pastor himself, Dr. Douglas Peake.
Well, welcome, everybody. And Jesse, speaking of journeys, you just returned from a long journey.
I did. I went all the way over to Israel, and man, was that an amazing experience. It's going to take me like 3 months just to like decompress all of the information I took in.
Absorb it all.
Yeah. And that's, I feel like I've come back more enlightened and context, right? The context is the biggest thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't that God necessarily, opened up a cloud to me and spoke down to me while I was over there, but I hate this phrase, but it came alive, right? Everything isn't just this ephemeral idea of a Bible story. It's like, no, I saw the trail that Jesus probably walked to go visit his mom when he was doing his ministry. I saw, the rough area of where all of the things happened during his passion. Like these things have physical locations that I saw, and that makes a huge amount of context suddenly clear.
And I think that, what's great about that is it kind of speaks to the Salty Pastor approach, and that is that the purpose of you going on that trip was for your own personal growth. It was your personal pilgrimage. You did the work. You paid the money, so to speak. You did the traveling, but you did it in a group of other people, right?
Yeah.
And you did it with a leader and a mentor who knew where to go and what to say. And that's what the Salty Pastor is all about, is our goal is to mentor and to coach and to lead and to guide,
right?
But in the end, it's for
your journey.
It's still your journey, and we want you. It's a partnership that the Salty Pastor tries to form, and so that's why what we do is we tend to share a lot of context. We try to bring it alive. We try to, but we want to get you in it so that it's your experience, right?
Yeah.
In faith,
because at any point I could have just stayed in the hotel and chosen to not participate or engage, right? And there's a lot of Christians these days that's what they're doing with their faith. Is they're like, you have the opportunity to go out and grow, and you just sit in the hotel room and turn on.
You're not engaged.
Turn on really bad Israeli soap operas.
I bet they're terrible. So, well, we're in our final series. We did a couple weeks without you, and we missed you immensely. It's called Desperado, and I'm trying to answer the question why men go it alone. They have questions about their life. They're wondering if who they are and what they're called to be has any value in our society anymore. Men going their own way. And so there's been a lot of these questions. I think it's, as every time we do a series on men, it seems to strike a nerve. And
well, I think it's almost a chord, and maybe not necessarily a nerve. For some people, it might be a nerve, but I think it's a chord. It's something that we're realizing it has to be brought up. You're restating something that, even the first week when Justin sang that Eagle song Desperado, they started speaking to these gaps that men are feeling and choosing to, I guess, believe in who they're supposed to be years ago, right? The Eagles sang about this deep longing for not wanting to be alone. You need to stop riding the fences by yourself. And the secular world's even talking about it, but they're trying to solve it in the wrong way.
Yeah, well, they're the main reason why men are going their own way. It's just so ridiculous. And so the first Sunday, we talked about how since male and female are created in the image of God, this means the masculine as well as the feminine, but the masculine is a reflection of God's image within us. However, that masculine soul, just like the feminine soul, has been tainted by sin. And so we have to kind of be aware of that and how that impacts us, right?
Yes.
And then the second thing is that our society, though, today, at least for the last 30 or 40 years, is deceiving males into believing that masculinity is the problem.
Well, and they've gotten to a point, I kind of talked about this on Sunday, they've convinced us long enough that they don't even have to necessarily say it anymore. We're self-enforcing that ideology on ourselves, right?
Exactly.
Like we're binding ourselves up with that own rope. They don't even have to hold it anymore. They're like, here, you hold this now. Yeah. And we're self-enforcing that ideology in ourselves of, well, we're the problem, we're toxic, we're the issue, so I can't do anything, and we start getting passive, right?
I was just exactly. And I was just listening to a guy just recently talking about it. He's a philosopher, and these are really big ideas, upstream ideas. When you first articulate them, people are offended by them. And I say, well, if you're offended by these ideas, it's because you've been, if I may be salty, infected by feminist ideology. And you don't realize it. There's so many ways we've been taken in, like Colossians 2:8. We've been taken captive by hollow and empty philosophies that rely upon the traditions of our society, our culture. And this is one, and that is that what a lot of men are told when they're married, when you have kids is well, I need help. And so they say, well, if you're a good father, you change the diapers, feed the baby, drop them off at school and stuff. And I'm not saying that there isn't a partnership that you do and you guys work that out, blah, blah. But the point is this is his point. If you are just simply feeding, helping to feed, change diapers, clothe, bathe, and drop off to school the kid, all you're being is a second mom.
Well, you're almost just being hired help is all you're really doing, right?
Yeah, his point is what does a father actually do? Articulate that to me. And this is his point. When you say to guys, what's a good father? They go, well, I help out around the house. I help cook. I help with the baby. I help da-da-da. And his point is that's how far off we've gotten that we don't even know how to articulate a good father. All we do is we say to men, be a second mom, and that makes you a good father. And he goes, it's not that those things aren't important. Those feminine qualities are critical. But when you lose masculinity, because what the father is supposed to do is the father is supposed to train masculinity. Here's a perfect example. I was watching a video of Asian father, right? And he was sitting at the table, and right next to him was his 2-year-old toddler. It was a boy. And then right on the other side of him was his mom. Right? And what happened is they're sitting at the table, and this little 2-year-old sitting in a big chair, not a high chair. And so dad is eating, his noodles or whatever, and the toddler falls off the chair, right? So mom gets up and comes around to pick the toddler up and get back on the chair, and the dad pushes her away. He just holds her hand. He holds his hand out, and he goes and he looks down and he goes, he signals up. And so the toddler boy climbs back up into the chair, right? And then the mom sits down and wants to reach over and get him his food and everything like that. And he puts his hand up to push her away. And what he's saying is, let him figure it out. And to me, that's what fathers do, is they say, it's time for the kids to figure it out. And that's a sense of masculinity. You can solve your own issue. And sometimes people wonder, why are kids so entitled? And the reason why, in my opinion, is because they're raised with a feminist mystique about it. Everything is given and supported. They're never really figure it out for yourself kind of kids.
Well, and so what I'm hearing you say is, very specifically, men have kind of just been relegated to this idea of almost a nanny, right? Like, we want you to help with doing all these little
domestic tasks, things,
which is not inherently a bad thing.
No,
but that's where they want it to stop.
Correct.
The feminist ideology has said that's the extent we want you to help. Anything past that, as far as how you should engage in how we raise, or how they learn, or the ideas that they should be having, or even the idea of letting them figure it out, like anything that has to do with that masculine qualities, we don't want any help with. So a good father is relegated to, do you cook? Do you help change the diapers?
Yeah.
Do you
Are you a
show
second
up?
mom?
Yeah. I mean,
but see, and here's the issue is that our sense of value, of being loved and needing to be loved is feminine in nature, right? And your mom makes you feel that way. I love you I love you no matter what. I'm here to help you and care for you. And their empathy, which is very important to masculinity, is learned from our moms and stuff like that. But the issue of self-respect is learned from your father. It's a masculine quality. And when you are a girl, right, and you grow up with a masculine father, as a female, you will have more self-respect than girls who grow up without a father. And this is proven in research. Okay, so your sense of your own value and your sense of self-respect is so much higher, research shows, when you have a masculine father in your life. Young men, when they grow up with a masculine father, what do they have? Self-respect. They have confidence. They have a can-do attitude. And I think that we need to bring this ethos back, and the only way to do that is it will never be found in society. You're never going to see a model of that in the media or on sitcoms or in movies or any of those kinds of things. You're not going to see it at the university level. You're not going to get that attitude in public education, and half of the private schools, you're not going to get it there either, the only place to get it is to be around other men who are masculine and understand the importance of fatherhood, the importance of masculinity for society at large. And so, this final week, what we want to really discuss is that if you don't have a group of masculine men around you, you're going to be stumbling in the dark trying to figure it out. And if I may be so bold as to talk, you've kind of talked a little bit about this in your own experience. You grew up, you didn't have a father, and then you go to college, you go off on the road, you're working out in all these other areas, and then you get a job here and you're working here, and you're not working around perfect men at all, but you're working around a lot of fairly masculine guys.
I'm working around men that are attempting to, that their goal is to be authentic masculine men, right? I spent a lot of time especially after I left, my hometown, because I was in a church there, and a lot of the things I learned about being a man initially, even just how to shave, was from like my male youth leader and men at my church who stepped up to take me hunting and do things like that. But once I left, I no longer had those influences in my life, right? I was in college, where there's definitely a bent to what masculinity is, right? I'm on the road with a bunch of artistic people who theater people, and they've been strongly influenced by what is quote unquote masculine and okay to express, right? And so it's like I was surrounding myself with people who were not going to encourage me to grow in authentic godly manhood, right? I was surrounding myself with people that were all being force-fed and believing what the world is telling them masculinity is. So even in the short time that I've been here at Foothills, which I spent a lot more time in college and on the road than I've been at Foothills, my growth has been significant in my understanding of authentic masculinity and what that looks like and how different it is and is supposed to be from what the world tells you it is supposed to be.
Yeah, and I think what's really powerful about that is, for guys, it's who you're around. Who you're spending your time with, because so much more is caught than taught.
Absolutely.
It's just, this is how they approach this situation. It would have been approached this way in another circumstance. And you're like, oh, wow. Oh, and this is what it means, they don't give up. They stick to it. So you're learning more and more of these masculine qualities, right?
And you see that I talked about this. I've been reading the Atomic Habits book Pastor Harv recommended a couple years ago, and I finally have gotten around to reading it. But in it, even in the secular ideology of creating a good habit, it's surround yourself with people who exhibit the qualities you want to have, right?
Yes.
And that's a secular idea, but it's the same idea God put out thousands of years ago, saying you need to be in community with the people that are going to focus on the things that are godly, not with the people that are off making sheep idols.
Yeah.
And we saw how that went up on Mount Carmel, right?
Yeah,
and so
that didn't go so well.
So that's the idea has been there for a long time. The secular world's kind of touching on it, but it's
well,
true.
Always,
it's like if you surround yourself with smokers, you're probably going to choose to smoke.
Yeah. Well, I always say that whenever the world has a great idea, they stole it from God.
Yeah.
And then they just leave his name off.
Yes. It's plagiarism at its finest.
It's plagiarism at its finest. Yeah, God copyrighted that. Because you see this theme all the way through. You know, we always talk about in the Old Testament, like in the book of Genesis, when Abraham left, the land of Ur and went to, a lot of people forget that he went with Lot. So he had another brother who believed the same as him. And, during Sodom and Gomorrah, he goes in and saves Lot, right? Lot is saved by angels. You had Moses, right, who went to help set the Israelites free from Pharaoh. But don't forget, Moses said, I can't speak. So he had a brother next to him, Aaron. Aaron was with him the entire time and speaking for him in many cases. And so he was there. You had Moses had Jethro, his father-in-law. He had Joshua, who he had, mentored.
He
and
trains
then
up to
he
take
trains
over.
up. But yeah, and then Joshua is the one that goes into
leads them into
the promised land and possesses it. They get it. But even Joshua, it's really interesting. At the very first of the book of Joshua, what happened is before they crossed the Jordan River, what happened is, and then going to Jericho, is that God had said that Reuben and another tribe could have all that area on the east,
the one side,
on the one side. And so what he did is he said, you can stay here and be at peace, but you need to send your fighting men with me to fulfill the command of God. And so what did Reuben do? They sent all of their men with Joshua. So see, Joshua didn't go alone. And all these other tribes didn't go it alone. You have Gideon. He had 300 faithful warriors that went into battle with him. There is David and Jonathan. David had 30 mighty men with him after he lost Jonathan, but originally he had Jonathan. You had Peter, James, and John. You had all 12 apostles. You had Paul with Barnabas, Silas, and then Timothy. And so you see this pattern over and over and over again. The one that sticks out to me that is so powerful is in 1 Samuel chapter 14 and then chapter 18 is Jonathan. And what's really interesting to me is the way the book of Samuel lays it out. Is it starts with Saul, who's anointed the king. He's the first king of Israel. And he was picked because he was this guy that was 6 foot something, just a strapping athlete.
He looked the part.
He looked the part outwardly. And what we said is when you don't understand authentic masculinity, you tend to adopt stereotypes or characteristics of masculinity, right?
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that guy's a masculine male.
Well, and we see that play out throughout, because once David enters the picture, we see all of this insecurity develop within Saul, right?
Saul,
he starts getting paranoid that David's out for his job and that David's going to do these things. And it's like, in all circumstances, Saul should be the quote unquote peak worldly view of masculinity. He should have full confidence in who he is, and he looks the part. I'm sure he was fairly attractive. I mean,
he was super handsome already, and huge and athletic.
He had all the money. It's like there's no reason he should have any inferiority complex when it comes to David, who when you first meet him, he's this 13, 14-year-old boy that's just like all reeds. I think it kind of talks about him having acne basically when he slays Goliath.
He's ruddy.
He's ruddy, right?
Yeah, and that's what I love about the way it plays out is in chapter 14, what you see of the first book of Samuel is you meet Jonathan, and Jonathan was probably physically like his dad, but he had a deeper character.
For those who are not familiar, Jonathan is
Saul's son. And in chapter 14, Jonathan goes up and kills 20 Philistines, 20 enemies in a half acre in a little tiny area. And he actually climbs up on a hill or mountain, and then does that. And that rallies everybody and they win the day and so forth. And the reason why Saul wasn't a masculine man and why God wanted another different king and why Samuel went and anointed David was for this very reason, is that because prior to that, Saul was a rash individual. He had no non-negotiables. He only made decisions on what was convenient for the moment. And then he was so prideful and arrogant, even if he made a stupid decision, he couldn't admit he was wrong.
So he would just run it down.
Oh gosh, it was childish is what it was. And so God says, my spirit is leaving Saul. And then, so David grows up with a dad who's basically what? Who looks the part, but he's a child inside. He's not a man a man of character and non-negotiables and values and honor. So he grows up. So he has this father wound in a sense, a poor example of what a father is to him. So this man is not mentoring him, right? Then what happens is in chapter 16 and 17, David shows up. He's anointed by God. And guess what happens? When Samuel goes to the house of Jesse to anoint the new king of Israel, what does Jesse, his dad, do? He puts all the brothers, all of his sons, in front of Samuel, except for who?
In front of David. Oh, yeah. So Samuel's there to anoint. He puts everybody. It's basically the Cinderella story, right? All the stepsisters get to go put out, and he's locked away in a closet, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what kind of wound did David have from his father?
That he's not enough.
You're not enough, right? And what's interesting is, so out there, in the field, he realizes God is my father. God is my champion. And so he then kills Goliath. He goes to the palace, all right? And it says in verse 1 of chapter 18 of 1 Samuel, it says that when Jonathan met David, their souls were knit together. And people have speculated why. Well, did their personality fit? My contention is because they both had the same father wound. See, they were knit together because they both had discovered that God was their father, and their earthly fathers did a really poor job of it, right?
Right.
And so what happens is David, like you said, he did not look masculine in any way, shape, or form. They said he looked ruddy, and some people have said, oh, that meant he was really handsome. But a lot of scholars are like, well, it's kind of, maybe he had, acne or something.
Right, like he was just this little scrawny. I mean, nerd has become a chic term these days.
Yeah.
But, you might think of kind of that like nerdy, wimpy kid, right? A little bit.
But he was brave. His heart was so much bigger than his body, and the old adage, it's what is it? It's not the dog who fights, but the fight and the dog that wins the day. And that's the whole point of SEALs and BUDS training, is that we don't want to take the most athletic. We don't want to take the most, baddest dude. We want the guys who are the most tenacious and can be bond together in a group. And so David and Jonathan are now knit together. And what happens is David, he knows God, but he has no earthly wisdom about palace intrigue and politics and how to lead groups of people.
He was just a shepherd boy.
He was a shepherd boy.
He's killed some lions and bears, and that's about the extent of his leadership
I go hunting
training.
but all this other, I don't know how this works. So who mentors him or encourages him and gives him advice and has him help navigate it? You read all these stories about how he and Jonathan had to secretly meet and talk, and Jonathan tells him what's going on and blah, blah, blah. And, you see all this, and what you realize, it's this friendship that allows David to discover his authentic masculinity. And how to deal with, the other thing, too, is that one of the reasons Saul got so jealous and wanted to kill David is because the people said to David, oh, you're better than Saul. And so instead of, Jonathan wouldn't let that go to David's head. Right. Mm-hmm. And so he was just a tremendous influence in him. And so I think that David and Jonathan and their relationship is a perfect example that men should dig into to realize how you have to be around men, like you said, who are pursuing the same thing and understand what they're pursuing.
Right.
Jonathan, of course, wasn't perfect, but that influence, even though imperfect, was so powerful and overwhelming for David. And I think that's really significant. And when you look into it and you dig into it and you pull out the truths of what's going on there, you find some basic principles. I'll throw a few out and then we can kind of discuss them. The first one is this, is that in order for men to discover, experience, and walk in true masculinity, they need to find men that inspire their masculine development, right? So where can you go to find that?
YouTube.
There you go, YouTube and TikTok.
Yeah,
they'll turn you into a guy in the blink of an eye.
They'll turn you into something, that's for sure.
Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously the best location is going to be within your church with men that are pursuing God, because ultimately he's the ultimate demonstration of authentic masculinity, right? But sometimes sometimes we need demonstrations that are more at our earthly level in order to really grow from that. Obviously you always need to be careful. You don't want to idolize a man, because ultimately they are just as broken as you are. They're going to make a mistake, and ultimately if you put them on a pedestal, and this has happened to me before. There's been men in my life that I've gone, oh, you're what I should be aspiring to be. But the moment you start putting them up on the pedestal and not going, well, God's doing good work in their life, but it's God, not them.
Right.
Then when they mess up, eventually it hurts, because then you're like, oh, it's reopened that father wound, or it's they let me down. Why is there no good men? Maybe this isn't the way. It's like, you do have to keep that perspective, but you can definitely look at people like men in our church that I go, hey, they don't have it all figured out, but they're definitely doing some things way better than I am as far as doing it right.
See, that's a problem with idolizing things, and particularly idolizing people, is because if you idolize somebody, you're doing that because you believe in your own heart that one day you can be that good. And then when they fall in your eyes, this is why Satan does this to us, is they fall, then what that is that you have to admit to yourself that you're not a good man and you'll never be one. And so, but then what you have to do is you realize, oh, what I thought was good was an external judgment, right? I thought they were good, and so really I was stereotyping masculinity.
Right.
And what really is going on is, what are they pursuing? Right. And to me, that is the most important thing as a male that you can do, is be around men, not who are perfect, not men you want to idolize, because idolization comes from the term what? Idol. And what are you not supposed to have in your life?
Idols.
Idols. We use that as a derogatory term for a reason.
Right.
And that is that idolization is something you do, but it's a character flaw when you do it. It's a character flaw. And the character flaw is designed to trip you up. It's like I was saying on Sunday, we talked about this last week, is that what the world wants to do is bind you up so that it can plunder your house. And so what it does is it plays these tricks on you. And one of them is, well, you idolize people, right? And you idolize this person, or you idolize that person, or you idolize. And what that is a character flaw on your part, because it trips you up. Because when you find out they're human, how do you feel, right?
Right.
You feel let down. And so what happens is then you're disappointed, and then you can get depressed, and then you're like, why try? And I'll never, Jordan Peterson has a quote that I like. He says, don't ever compare yourself to somebody else. Don't ever do that. He says, compare yourself to where you were yesterday. That's it. And that's really, I think, why you want to be around masculine men, because what you realize is that they're not trying to be perfect. And in some ways, when you're around really authentically masculine men, they know they're flawed, but they're not bent out of shape because of it.
Right.
Right? We talked in our study of Philippians about how our righteousness is not in our own self. It's not in our own achievements. It's not in our own glory, our own activity. It's in what? Knowing Christ and him alone.
Absolutely.
Right? So that's it. I think the other one is that you need a group of like-minded men to surround you, because you're going to fall in battle.
Right.
Right? And you need that, because you need like-minded men who understand the goal is not perfection. The goal is what? Get up and try again.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Pastor. I'm really excited to continue talking about this, Pastor Harv's preaching this week.
Pastor Harv's going to preach on Thursday, he and I, and we're all going to sit and chat down about some of the implications of this and dig in.
I mean, I think this series just as a whole has been really inspirational for me personally. I've been gone for a majority of it, but I've been listening to the sermons, and I think it's just so powerful in our time right now of people constantly telling you what manhood looks like, quote unquote, and God has offered you an authentic look. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of where we should be looking for our definition of authentic manhood. And ultimately that we're not supposed to do it alone, right? Like this series has been twofold. What is authentic masculinity? And how are you supposed to pursue it? And that's not alone. Don't go out there and try to figure it out by yourself, because that's how you fall. That's how you get bound up again, right? If you're by yourself, it's very easy to get captured. When you're in a group, there's a lot more protection, right?
Someone's got your six.
Someone's got your six. Thank you guys so much for joining us here on the Salty Pastor Podcast. I'm so excited to be back, and we'll see you on Thursday here at Foothills Christian Church.
Blessings.